You are about to hear one of the darkest secrets of World War II, experiments so cruel they targeted the most innocent, children. What you will discover is not just history. It is a chilling testament to human cruelty, to the suffering endured by thousands of young lives in camps where survival was a daily battle. Brace yourself. What follows is a story that will make you question humanity itself. Yet it is all painfully real. Emma was 10 when the trucks rolled through the dusty gates of the camp. The sun barely lit the horizon, but the air smelled of iron, smoke, and fear. Children huddled in corners, clutching small belongings, eyes wide with terror. The barracks loomed ahead like tombstones, their shadows stretching long and ominous in the morning light. Whispers traveled quickly. Some said they were being brought here for work, others for unspeakable experiments. Emma tried to imagine what awaited her, but even her wildest thoughts could not match the horror. Soldiers barked orders. The children obeyed, trembling. Every footstep on the dry, cracked earth seemed louder than it should have been, echoing through the empty yard and amplifying the anxiety that gripped every child. Dust swirled around their feet, catching in hair and eyes, coating hands that had been clinging tightly to small bundles of meager belongings. Emma's stomach twisted as she passed under the barbed wire, its sharp metal glinting in the early light, enclosing them in a world that seemed built to crush hope. Each glance at the barracks, at the endless wire, at the watchtowers looming overhead, filled her with a mixture of awe and terror, a realization that there was no place to hide, no corner untouched by fear. Inside, the camp pressed against them like a cage. Watchtowers loomed over wooden barracks. Dogs patrolled in tight circles, snarling at those who lingered too long in the open. The guards moved silently, their boots striking the dirt in a rhythm that seemed to echo through the children's skulls. Emma tried to recall her home in Poland, the warm kitchen, the smell of bread, the laughter of her siblings. But those memories were distant, fragile as cobwebs, easily swept away by the harsh reality around her. Other children who had been there longer moved with hollowed eyes and mechanical motions, their bodies showing the wear of months of fear, hunger, and discipline. Some stared blankly ahead, seemingly resigned to the routine of inspection, forced labor, and endless counting, while others whispered in the shadows about friends who had disappeared, taken away for reasons no one dared speak of aloud. The air was thick with tension. A cough, a stumble, a glance in the wrong direction could provoke a sharp word, a strike, or worse. Emma felt a shiver crawl down her spine, not from the cold morning air, but from the invisible weight of the guards' scrutiny, the unspoken rules of survival that each child instinctively understood. Every sound, the bark of a dog, the crack of a whip, the low murmur of other children, resonated like a warning, a constant reminder that here, fear was not just an emotion, but a means of control. Emma's small hands clenched into fists, nails biting into palms as she tried to steady herself. Each step forward carried her deeper into the camp, and with it, the realization that childhood had been stolen, replaced by an endless vigilance, a need to anticipate danger before it arrived. The barracks were made of rough, splintered wood, patched and worn from years of use, their small windows offering little light. Inside, children huddled together on thin straw mattresses, whispering stories of home, of fields and rivers they would never see again. Meals were sparse, water rationed, sleep interrupted by the sound of boots on gravel and the occasional shout. Emma noticed that some of the older children had learned to move like shadows, invisible when necessary, while others had begun to show the marks of punishment, bruises, scars, and the dull, vacant stare of those who had been tested beyond endurance. Fear she realized, had many faces. The overt terror of a guard's bark, the quiet panic of not knowing what tomorrow would bring, and the heavy weight of hopelessness pressing on their young hearts. Emma clutched her small bundle tighter, whispering a silent promise to herself that she would survive, somehow, even as the camp's oppressive atmosphere threatened to crush every ounce of courage she had left. The morning wore on, the sun climbing higher but offering no warmth, only the harsh illumination of the camp's realities. The children were herded into lines for inspection, their bodies pressed together like fragile pieces of machinery, every movement scrutinized by the guards. Emma noticed the meticulous way the soldiers observed them, cataloging even the smallest tremble or hesitation. Nearby, a small boy of her age stifled a sob, and she wanted to reach out, but instinct told her to stay still, to obey, to blend in. She watched as others were pulled from the line, some returning with cuts, bruises, or quiet tears, others never returning at all. Emma's thoughts scattered between memories of home and the harshness of her present reality, trying to anchor herself in something human, something warm and familiar. Even as the camp pressed down like a living, breathing entity, intent on stripping them of all innocence, the echo of her own heartbeat, the scent of dust and metal, and the distant, low growl of a dog combined into a suffocating symphony that filled every corner of her consciousness, reminding her that survival here was not guaranteed, and that every step forward was a battle against fear itself. The routines began almost immediately. Morning roll calls echoed across the camp, a harsh rhythm that set the pace of each day. Meals were thin, barely nourishing, served on tin trays that rattled against wooden tables. Inspections followed, with guards scrutinizing every movement, every expression, their eyes sharp and unyielding. Medical checks were constant, often invasive, leaving children anxious and confused. Whispers traveled quickly among the barracks. Rumors of children being used for disease testing, injected with unknown substances, subjected to trials that no child could possibly endure. Emma watched as older children were taken away, some returning with burns, bruises, or haunted eyes, others never returning at all. The camp's doctors spoke softly, but with authority, their words calm yet terrifying, a contrast that made them even more chilling. Emma could not understand what they were saying, but she felt the fear in the others, a silent knowledge that their lives were at the mercy of the adults in white coats, and that defiance or resistance could bring punishment or worse. One day, Emma was called for an examination. A man in a white coat led her into a cold, dimly lit room. The air smelled sharply of disinfectant and metal. She sat trembling on a narrow wooden bench while he measured her temperature, weighed her, and prodded her body with meticulous precision, recording every detail in a ledger. Around her, children shivered, some silently weeping, others staring blankly as if already numbed by repeated examinations. Emma heard whispers of children who had been forced to endure freezing water, hunger, and injections with experimental vaccines, sometimes for diseases like typhus, malaria, or influenza. These experiments were carefully documented, often without any intention of recovery. Fear and confusion tangled together in Emma's small body, her hands clenched into fists as she tried to hold on to a fragment of courage. Each poke, each cold touch of the doctor's hands seemed to carry a hidden threat, and even the slightest movement might draw scrutiny, or worse, selection for a more painful procedure. She noticed the other children's expressions, some vacant, some defiant in tiny, silent ways, and realized that survival meant learning to navigate terror, to mask every hint of panic while keeping one's wits about them. The hours in the examination room stretched endlessly, each second heavy with anticipation of what might come next. Emma could feel the tension vibrating through her small body, a constant reminder of the vulnerability of children in this place. The doctors moved with detached precision, recording notes, taking measurements, occasionally muttering to one another, their conversations indecipherable yet filled with authority. She saw children of her age return to the barracks with new scars, marks of needles or burns that glistened in the dim light, and she understood that these trials were not only physical, but psychological. Fear had become as much a tool as the instruments and chemicals used in the experiments. Emma tried to imagine the world beyond the camp, her home, her family, the smells of bread and fields. But those memories seemed fragile, almost a dream, compared to the stark reality pressing down on her. Each child clung to whatever small hope they could, a whispered story, a shared glance, a fleeting memory, a tiny thread keeping them tethered to humanity in the midst of dehumanization. Days blurred into weeks, and Emma quickly learned the rhythms of terror. She memorized the sequence of roll calls, the timing of inspections, the movements of the guards and the doctors. Every sound, the click of boots, the shuffle of papers, the faint whine of a child, was a signal, a warning, a piece of a survival map she had to navigate. She noticed how some children adapted, moving like shadows, avoiding the gaze of those who decided who would be taken for experiments. Others broke down, their fear too heavy to contain, and they disappeared, carried away by the authority of the camp's routine. Emma understood, at a level far beyond her age, that compliance and observation could prolong life, yet compliance could never guarantee safety. In this place, the line between life and suffering was thin, and the smallest lapse could tip the balance. Through all of it, Emma's heart raced with a mix of terror and determination. She refused to let the camp strip her completely of herself, even if that meant learning to survive in the shadows of fear and cruelty. The months passed in a blur of terror, each day blending into the next with a relentless rhythm of fear. Children disappeared daily, sometimes without a sound, leaving empty spaces in the barracks and a lingering silence that seemed to whisper warnings to those left behind. Some were taken for experiments involving hypothermia, forced into ice-cold water to see how long their small bodies could endure the shock. Others were deliberately infected with viruses or bacteria to study the progression of diseases, sometimes with deliberate neglect of care, ensuring suffering would be as intense as possible. Emma watched, heart pounding, as children her age convulsed, screamed, or froze, paralyzed by both physical agony and psychological terror. She quickly learned that compliance was a lifeline, a fragile shield against the camp's cruelty, yet even obedience could not guarantee safety. Stories whispered through the barracks told of children who resisted, who asked questions or faltered, and how they vanished, leaving nothing but rumors and the tremors of fear behind. Every glance at a disappearing friend, every sudden absence, was a lesson in survival, a cruel reminder of the boundaries imposed by the adults who controlled their lives. Despite the overwhelming horror, small acts of resilience flickered like fragile flames in the darkness. Children shared scraps of bread, pooling what little they had to sustain each other in secret, careful to avoid the watchful eyes of guards and doctors. They told stories to distract themselves and one another, recounting memories of home, of fields, rivers, and laughter, conjuring worlds far from the camp's oppressive walls. Games were invented in shadowed corners of the barracks, rules whispered and understood in silence, small rebellions of imagination that allowed the children a momentary escape from reality. Emma discovered a quiet strength in these fleeting acts of defiance, a fragile thread of humanity amidst the relentless terror. She and Jakob, her closest companion, developed a silent understanding, offering comfort through shared warmth, whispered words, or the simple presence of another human being. Even a small touch, a hand on a shoulder, became an affirmation that they were still children, still human, capable of compassion and hope, despite the world pressing down around them. Emma began to observe patterns in their small society, noting how alliances formed, how certain children became protectors, offering a whispered warning or a diversion during rounds. She noticed the ways in which humor, storytelling, and quiet gestures created a fragile culture of resistance. Every whispered tale from home, every secret laugh, was a small but vital act of rebellion against the camp's intent to strip them of identity and innocence. Emma clung to these moments, understanding that survival was not only about obedience, but about retaining the essence of who she was, even in a place designed to erase childhood. The bond with Jakob became central to her endurance. They shared memories, imagined adventures, and gave each other strength. In the silence between rounds, they would huddle together, speaking softly about the past and the distant hope of freedom, creating a private sanctuary of trust and empathy amidst the ever-present fear. As the months wore on, Emma learned to navigate the camp's rhythms with a mixture of caution and cunning. She observed the guards' habits, noting when their attention wandered, when opportunities arose for a scrap of food to be shared or a moment of laughter to be stolen. She memorized the paths through the barracks and the hidden nooks where she and Jakob could converse without being overheard. Even in the darkest moments, when the cries of other children echoed through the wooden walls, Emma's small mind held on to the conviction that human connection, even fragile and fleeting, could counter the camp's cruelty. These acts of courage, though silent and hidden, became the scaffolding of hope, proving that the human spirit could endure even in the most unimaginable conditions. In the quiet corners of the barracks, amidst fear and pain, the children created a miniature world of resilience. One story, one touch, one shared crumb at a time, defying the attempts to reduce them to mere subjects of experimentation. Experiments intensified as the weeks wore on, each day bringing new horrors that pushed the children's bodies and minds to the limit. Doctors tested drugs, vaccines, and even surgical procedures without anesthesia, moving with a precision that was clinical, detached, and terrifying. Records later revealed that children were sometimes deliberately infected with measles, typhus, or tuberculosis, their suffering treated as data points rather than as human lives. Emma watched in silent horror as injections left children burning with fever, shaking uncontrollably, their muffled cries swallowed by the walls of the examination rooms. The doctors moved with cold efficiency, indifferent to the pain, and Emma learned to memorize every sound, every gesture, every subtle shift in the guards' and doctors' behavior. Anticipation became her tool for survival, a fragile shield against the unknown terrors that awaited each child in turn. She counted heartbeats, tracked footsteps, and became acutely aware of the rhythms of the camp, understanding that even a moment of distraction could have consequences far beyond comprehension. Food was scarce, often barely enough to sustain energy for the endless routines of roll call, labor, and examinations. Sleep was fragmented, interrupted by the distant barks of dogs, the crack of a whip, or the sudden roar of a guard's anger. Fear was omnipresent, an invisible layer that draped over every child. pressing down on them with a weight that could make even standing seem exhausting. Emma observed patterns in the suffering. Those who questioned, resisted, or displayed even a hint of defiance were often the ones taken for the most dangerous experiments. Inside the barracks, a single cough, a misplaced glance, or a whispered question could ignite terror. And yet, despite the omnipresent cruelty, whispers of hope persisted. Some children, clinging to fragments of imagination, spoke aloud of family reunions, conjuring images of warmth, laughter, and freedom. Others plotted escapes, drawing invisible maps on the dusty floors of the barracks, marking imaginary lines and safe zones in a delicate game of survival. Emma began to create her own invisible boundaries, small rituals that allowed her to carve out a sense of control in a world designed to strip it away. She would draw lines with a stick in the dust, silently declaring areas where she and Jacob could retreat, where whispers could be exchanged without risk of discovery. Every shared laugh, every memory of home became a small act of rebellion, a defiance of the cruelty imposed by adults who treated them as experiments rather than children. In these tiny moments, Emma found a fragile form of empowerment, a spark that reminded her of what it meant to be human. She whispered stories to Jacob about fields and rivers, about warm kitchens and families waiting, and in doing so, created a lifeline between the present terror and the world beyond the camp walls. The children developed intricate ways to survive, relying on observation, intuition, and one another. Emma learned to notice the smallest cues, the tilt of a doctor's head, the sound of a footstep, a subtle glance from a guard, and to act accordingly. Food scraps were shared quietly, stories passed in hushed tones, laughter stifled into brief smiles that vanished too quickly. Each act, no matter how minor, became a rebellion against the system attempting to erase their identities. Emma understood that the camp could take their comfort, their freedom, even their physical well-being, but it could not entirely erase the human spirit. Memory, imagination, and small acts of kindness became the children's armor, a protective layer against the relentless assaults on body and mind. In this place, where cruelty was measured with precision, humanity was preserved in the smallest gestures, and Emma clung to every one of them with fierce determination. Even as experiments grew more brutal, Emma and the children began to form quiet networks of support, subtle alliances built on trust and shared experience. They found moments to comfort one another, to share warmth or food, to whisper words of reassurance in the dark corners of the barracks. Every stolen moment of laughter or storytelling became a victory, a refusal to be entirely consumed by the camp's machinery of terror. Emma's awareness sharpened. She learned not just to endure, but to protect herself and those closest to her as best she could. Even amidst the cruelty, the rituals of hope, the invisible lines, the whispered stories, the shared scraps, allowed her to preserve a sense of identity, a spark of humanity that no experiment could fully extinguish. In a world designed to break them, Emma clung to these fragile threads, understanding that survival was not just physical, but a matter of keeping the spirit alive. Night brought both relief and terror, a paradox that weighed heavily on the children. Darkness offered the possibility of rest, yet it also magnified the unknown, the invisible threats that lurked beyond the barracks' wooden walls. In these shadows, children whispered memories of home, songs or stories their hearts clung to like life rafts. Emma imagined the fields behind her old house in Poland, the tall grass swaying in the wind, the river where she once played, its surface reflecting sunlight as if mocking the dim barracks around her. She shared these visions with Jakob and a few others, weaving fragile narratives that carried them temporarily away from the unrelenting reality of fear, experiments, and deprivation. The smallest comforts, a hidden piece of bread, a gentle touch, a shared laugh, became essential acts of resistance. Each moment of connection reminded them that despite the horrors surrounding them, they were still children, still human, still capable of hope. Memory itself became a shield, preserving their spirits against the dehumanization systematically inflicted by the camp's design. The camp's records, later unearthed by historians, revealed a level of cruelty meticulously planned and executed. Children were cataloged with precision, measured by height, weight, and age, their personal details logged before selection for experiments. These were not isolated acts of violence. They were organized, methodical, designed to study and manipulate the human body while erasing individuality. Experiments included hypothermia tests, where children were submerged in icy water until their bodies trembled beyond control. High-altitude simulations that caused dizziness, nausea, and sometimes loss of consciousness. Exposure to infectious diseases with no intention of care. And chemical injections whose effects were unpredictable and often fatal. Emma witnessed surgical procedures performed without anesthesia, the stark efficiency of doctors, contrasting with the immense suffering of their patients. The clinical, detached language of the records could never convey the raw terror experienced by a child facing such trials. Emma came to understand fear in its most elemental form, the fear of being reduced to nothing more than a statistic, a body to be cataloged, analyzed, and experimented upon without regard for humanity. The children were acutely aware of their vulnerability, of the fine line between life and suffering. Each day was a negotiation between obedience and survival, a careful balance of maintaining a low profile while preserving whatever shred of self remained. Emma memorized the cadence of footsteps, the tone of guards' voices, and the subtle cues of doctors moving through the barracks, learning that awareness could be a lifeline. Even in the darkest corners, Emma found moments of clarity, observing how older children adapted, how some created small systems of protection, how whispers and gestures became networks of understanding that shielded them in small ways. Within the barracks, whispered stories of family, home, and imagined escapes persisted. Children huddled together for warmth, for comfort, for reassurance that they were not alone. Emma and Jakob developed a quiet routine, sharing memories and creating rituals that gave them structure and meaning, a fragile form of control in an environment designed to strip it away. Even the act of speaking softly in shared secrecy became a defiance, a refusal to let the camp erase their identities. Emma realized that these small acts, storytelling, laughter, shared touch, were themselves forms of resistance, subtle but powerful ways to assert their humanity against overwhelming cruelty. Memory became not only armor, but also a lifeline, connecting them to the world beyond the camp, preserving hope in a place where hope was systematically extinguished. Emma watched as other children developed their own survival strategies, from concealing scraps of food to learning the nuances of guards' attention, timing movements to avoid scrutiny, and finding fleeting moments of reprieve in the shadows. These acts, though seemingly minor, carried enormous weight, representing the human spirit's persistence even under relentless pressure. The children's whispered networks, their covert gestures, and imagined games became both psychological sustenance and a method of resistance. Through these connections, Emma understood that survival was not only about enduring physical hardships, but also about maintaining a sense of identity, a spark of humanity that the camp sought to destroy. Each night, as darkness fell and terror mingled with fragile comfort, she clung to these small acts, recognizing that even in the face of systematic cruelty, resilience and hope could endure, and that memory, connection, and imagination were shields no experiment could fully dismantle. As the war progressed, distant sounds of artillery echoed over the horizon, faint at first, then growing steadily louder, hinting at the changing tides of conflict beyond the barbed wire. Rumors of Allied advances circulated among the prisoners, whispered in hushed tones during moments of relative calm, each story carrying both hope and disbelief. Emma and the other children clung to these whispers as if they were lifelines, fragile yet persistent threads connecting them to a world they had almost forgotten. Every day was a careful dance of survival. Obey the doctors and guards without question. Comfort friends who shivered in fear. Hide when opportunity allowed, and mentally record every detail of the horrors they endured. Even under relentless threat, the children's resilience persisted, a testament to the indomitable human spirit that refused to be fully extinguished by cruelty, deprivation, and fear. Emma learned to read the smallest shifts in behavior, to anticipate danger, and to seize any fleeting moment of safety as a precious gift. Liberation arrived in a wave of chaos, sudden and surreal. Soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms entered the camp, their voices loud but not threatening, questioning the guards and offering food, blankets, and reassurance. Emma felt disbelief as she reached for the soft warmth of a blanket for the first time in months, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the fabric. Around her, children ran in every direction, crying, laughing, and embracing one another with abandon, overwhelmed by emotions long suppressed. The camp's barracks, once oppressive and unyielding, seemed smaller now, in contrast to the sudden influx of freedom. Watchtowers still cast long, dark shadows, and memories of screams, injections, and the clinical detachment of doctors lingered like ghosts. But outside the fences, the world pulsed with life. Emma inhaled deeply, tasting freedom as if for the first time, feeling the weight of months of terror begin to lift. Even as the scars, both visible and invisible, remained etched into her memory. The children moved cautiously at first, stepping into open spaces, unsure whether the chaos signaled true liberation or a new danger. Guards were questioned, some removed from duty, while soldiers distributed what had been denied for so long: warm food, clean water, and moments to rest without fear. Emma's senses were overwhelmed. The smell of fresh bread, the sunlight on her face, and the soft brush of grass beneath her feet contrasted violently with the metallic, antiseptic odors of the camp. Each small comfort became monumental. Every laugh, every whispered story of family and home, a reaffirmation of life itself. Jacob clung to her hand, and together they navigated this strange, liberated world, their steps cautious but determined, learning to trust the world beyond the barbed wire that had confined them for so long. As the camp slowly emptied of prisoners, Emma observed the transformation around her. Formerly rigid routines dissolved into confusion and relief. Children explored the barracks and yards with a mixture of curiosity and lingering fear. She saw others sitting quietly, reflecting, or simply staring at the sky, absorbing the reality of survival after months of systematic cruelty. Even the smallest gestures, a smile, a shared blanket, a whispered word, felt monumental. Emma recognized that despite the trauma, the human capacity for connection and resilience had persisted. Each child, in their own way, had preserved a spark of humanity, defiance, and memory. Stories of survival, painful yet triumphant, etched themselves into minds and hearts, ensuring that the horrors would not be forgotten, but neither would the courage, ingenuity, and quiet acts of resistance that had sustained them. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the first true sense of control over her body and her surroundings in months. The world beyond the camp fences stretched wide, alive and unbound, offering possibilities she had almost stopped imagining. Memories of the past, though painful, were now intertwined with the promise of the future. She understood that freedom came with the responsibility to remember, to honor those who had vanished, and to carry forward the resilience and hope that had kept them alive. The sun-illuminated faces of children who had endured the unimaginable, their eyes reflecting a mixture of relief, sorrow, and newfound determination. Emma realized that survival was not only about escaping the physical confines of the camp, but also about preserving the strength of spirit, memory, and humanity, a truth that would remain with her forever. Even after liberation, the psychological scars endured, lingering long after the barbed wire had been cut and the guards had vanished. Emma and the other survivors faced a world that had continued without them, a world changed beyond recognition. Towns and cities to which they returned were often in ruins, homes destroyed by bombings or repurposed for other uses, leaving families fractured and lives upended. The children carried not only hunger and exhaustion, but also memories of fear, pain, and the unrelenting experiments that had stripped them of safety and innocence. Every shadow, every unfamiliar sound could provoke a flash of memory, a vivid recollection of the cold rooms, injections, and screams. Emma, like many, struggled to reconcile relief with trauma, freedom with the lasting imprint of terror. Even moments of comfort and normalcy were tinged with the knowledge that her childhood had been stolen, and that the world beyond the camp would never fully erase what had been endured. Survivors became witnesses to history, their voices vital for recording the atrocities that had been hidden in secrecy. Emma shared her experiences in whispered recollections, diaries, and later conversations with historians, ensuring that the truth of what happened in the camps was not forgotten. While liberation had ended the immediate threat, the memories of cruel experiments on innocent children demanded acknowledgement and remembrance. They told of hypothermia tests, injections of disease, surgical procedures without anesthesia, and countless other horrors, conveying not just physical suffering, but the psychological toll of being treated as subjects rather than as human beings. The act of remembering became both a burden and a responsibility, a means to honor those who had not survived and to educate the world about the capacity for cruelty when power and ideology override compassion. Emma grew up carrying the dual weight of trauma and testimony. She understood that human cruelty could reach unimaginable depths, yet she also discovered that memory, education, and the telling of truth could illuminate the darkest corners of history. Survivors like her learned to navigate a world that both feared and revered the lessons of the past, understanding that bearing witness was essential to prevent repetition. Every story, every diary entry, every recorded testimony served as a reminder that even the most systematic cruelty could not fully extinguish humanity, empathy, or courage. Emma's experiences shaped her perspective on life, instilling both a deep sorrow for the lost innocence of her generation and a determination to ensure that history would remember the children who had suffered so profoundly. Historians later documented that tens of thousands of children in camps like Auschwitz, Dachau, and Ravensbrück were subjected to experiments that tested endurance, disease resistance, and human limits. Eyewitness accounts, diaries, and medical records confirmed the unimaginable suffering endured by these young lives. They were subjected to forced exposure, to extreme temperatures, infectious diseases, chemical injections, and surgical procedures without anesthesia. Emma's story, though fictionalized for narrative purposes, embodies the countless real children who endured similar trials, standing as a representation of their collective suffering and resilience. Through meticulous research, survivors' testimonies, and historical records, the voices of these children, once silenced, continue to resonate, ensuring that the horrors they endured remain part of the collective memory of humanity. The legacy of these trials extends beyond historical record into education, remembrance, and moral reflection. Emma and her peers, having survived the unimaginable, became living testaments to resilience, courage, and the necessity of witnessing. They confronted a world that had often turned a blind eye, demanding that the truth be told and lessons learned. Their memories, though painful, provided a bridge to understanding, ensuring that future generations could grapple with the reality of human cruelty, recognize the signs of dehumanization, and honor the resilience of those who endured. Emma's life, shaped by trauma, testimony, and perseverance, became a symbol of the enduring power of memory, the necessity of education, and the responsibility to never forget the children who suffered in silence during one of history's darkest chapters. Remembering these horrors is essential. The secret trials on children during World War II stand as a stark warning to all of humanity. Cruelty can be hidden behind authority, science, and obedience, often masquerading as progress or necessity. These experiments were not simply acts of wartime violence. They were deliberate assaults on innocence, targeting the most vulnerable, those too young to defend themselves, too small to resist, and yet expected to endure unimaginable suffering. Emma's survival is not merely a personal victory. It represents the endurance of countless children whose names may never be recorded, but whose experiences shaped the very understanding of human cruelty. Each story of suffering, each whispered memory, each child who lived to tell their tale, serves as a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As viewers and readers, witnessing this story compels us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature, to see clearly that obedience to authority or blind adherence to scientific or political structures can be twisted into instruments of harm. It reminds us that vigilance is necessary, not only against overt acts of war, but against the insidious ways cruelty can hide behind legality, protocol, or expertise. These trials were meticulously documented, planned, and carried out under the guise of research. Yet at their core was the deliberate dehumanization of children. Remembering is a moral obligation, a way to honor their lives, their suffering, and their courage. To forget these events is to risk allowing similar horrors to take root again, hidden under bureaucracy or ideology, yet no less real or devastating. Emma's story exemplifies the duality of human experience in such circumstances, the coexistence of unimaginable suffering and unbroken hope. Her survival embodies the quiet defiance of the human spirit, a refusal to surrender fully to despair, even when every element of the environment is designed to strip identity, agency, and childhood itself. She and others like her remind us that resilience is not always loud or visible. It can exist in the smallest gestures, in the act of remembering, in the shared glance, or in the will to speak out when freed. These children, their innocence stolen, yet their memories living on, challenge us to honor them by learning, teaching, and speaking truth to the darkness of history. The importance of remembering extends beyond acknowledgement. It is an active, ongoing responsibility. It demands that societies confront uncomfortable truths, that the legacies of cruelty and resistance are preserved through testimony, scholarship, and storytelling. Every act of remembering is a tribute to those children, a refusal to let their suffering fade into obscurity, and a commitment to ensure that the horrors they endured are never repeated. Emma's survival and the stories of countless others compel us to carry forward the weight of memory, not as a burden of despair, but as a beacon of awareness, empathy, and moral responsibility. By honoring these children, by bearing witness to their experiences, we contribute to a world that recognizes both the depths of human cruelty and the extraordinary capacity for courage, resilience, and the preservation of innocence against all odds.